Okay, there you go.
All right, I'd like to call our meeting to order. I believe it's 6 o'clock. This August 7th meeting of Mexico Beach Planning and Zoning. And I think we will begin with our city clerk, Tammy, taking roll call.
Mr. Durkins?
Here.
Mr. Elzey?
Here.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Here.
Mr. Priest?
Here.
Mr. Linderman?
Here.
Mr. Cox?
Here.
Ms. Gardner? Ms.
All right, next up, we have the minutes for the June 5, 2023 meeting. Are there any questions, corrections, or would anyone like to make a motion to accept? Make a motion to accept. Have a motion to accept the meeting?
Second.
Have a second? Ms. Tammy, is that good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Look, you need to vote.
Oh, it's consent. Okay. We're still voting.
Just say, all in favor, say aye.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, the only item on tonight's agenda is Mexico Beach Land Development Code. Proposed revisions in new language to, this says Article 6, I think it might be Article 7, but I believe we'll start off with Carly Hansen or Laura.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to come and introduce myself. My name is Laura Mills-Gutcher, and I'm the principal of the company that Carly works for. And I'm a certified land use planner, and I've been in the business for over 25 years. I've had the company for about 12 years, and I just wanted to introduce myself. I am actually the author of the document that's before you today, and wrote it from the perspective of a person who testifies a lot as an expert witness and can tell you what kinds, it helps me to know kind of what things are looked for when we're in a testimony case, an expert witness case, whether that's before a county commission, a city council, Department of Administrative Hearings at the state level, or in circuit court, which I've done all of those. It's very important when we look at these technical documents to be able to have something concrete to look at. So less wiggle room, less, especially on a quasi-judicial hearing issue like this. Things that come before you are 100% either legislative or quasi-judicial, and a quasi-judicial hearing should require people to be sworn in and testify. So when you are looking to adopt language like this into your code, you want to be certain. You want to have certainty, because uncertainty, as you have seen in recent cases, provides a lot of confusion on what we can and can't do, and what we're allowed to enforce and what we're not allowed to enforce. So certainty is key, and as certain as we can be, the better you are and less challenge you will face in the future. So I just wanted to give you an overview as you're kind of considering this language, and what you should be looking for is less certainty is good, not only for the city, but for whoever is applying for the request, so that there's less room for interpretation and less wiggle room as you're walking through.
So I can walk you through that proposed language we have before you. There are a few minor revisions, just including the naming of Article 7 of the code. And we're proposing the addition of Section 7.04.02, establishing a clear process and standard of review for granting the variance. Just a little background, a variance is generally permission for a landowner to go outside of the limitations of the zoning code and build something that would otherwise be illegal under the terms of the land development code. The reason to allow a variance is that in some situations, the literal interpretation of the code would create a hardship that would not allow any use of the certain parcel of property whatsoever. This variance code cannot be issued from the comprehensive plan, goals, objectives, policies, map, or any designation of the zoning map. And we are establishing or proposing a process that would start by the applicant submitting the application to the city administrator, signed and with the property owner or the applicant and the application fee. This application would require a site plan with the dimensions, setbacks, and to clearly identify the nature, extent, and location of the request. In some instances, that may require a consistency analysis. We gave that decision to the city administrator, where the property owner should prove that it's compatible and inconsistent with the land development code and comprehensive plan, and this variance language. It's the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that this hardship in order for the city to issue the variance. If the property owner or applicant presents no evidence, then the city council shall deny the request. We are proposing that variances can be issued for area variances. This includes lot size, floor area ratio, lot coverage, also known as impervious surface, open space, and building setbacks. This also includes section 4.02.08, and that's tree and landscape requirements. However, variances cannot be issued for the height of the structure and for development issued within the designated floodway if the result increases the flood levels within the floodway. And then we get into the standards of review, where the applicant must submit a variance request that demonstrates all of the following standards have been met. This starts with a special condition or physical circumstance that exists where are particular to the land and which are not applicable to other land subjected to the same regulations or policies. This includes parcel size, shape, or topography of the land. For example, the variance is necessary to protect against wetland infill or protected trees from impact or removal. The second condition, or standard of review, excuse me, the special conditions and circumstances that exist do not result from the actions of the property owner or applicant or are self-imposed hardships, nor could the condition or circumstance be corrected or avoided by the property owner or applicant. As such, the issuance of the variance shall not confer on the petitioners the grant of a special privilege. For example, a property owner cannot be issued a setback variance on a property that can reasonably contain a house with a smaller footprint. The third being, the relief granted is the minimum degree of relief necessary to make possible the reasonable use of the land in compliance with all other applicable regulations. The fourth, literal interpretation of the provisions of this code would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties that are subject to the same regulations or policies, or would render the enforcement of this code impractical. The fifth, the grant of the relief would not be in degradation of the general intent and purpose of this code, nor the goals, objectives, or policies of the comprehensive plan. And the final standard of review, the issuance of the variance will not create an inconsistency from the existing character of the area surrounding the site. For the purpose of this measure, surrounding site shall mean those parcels which are within a 500-foot radius of the subject parcel or within the same platted subdivision as applicable. So each variance request would need to be reviewed on its own merits based on these standards of review rather than on the basis of the previous approved variances in this city. And an economic disadvantage due to the property owner or applicant's preferences as to what they want to do on their property is not sufficient to constitute a hardship. So I can answer any questions y'all have on that, but that's a good rundown.
Any members of the board have any questions? Roy? Carly?
I got in this particular thing, I know the last thing that we went through, we took it to the P&Z just so we didn't have these procedures and just to be in an abundance of caution.
Yeah.
This, it doesn't go to P&Z, it just goes to the council.
Right, that's as it's written, Laura.
Yeah, I noticed that under process number 5, it goes directly to the council.
I have some questions. So I've read this several times, and to me, it's hard to understand. I'm not quite sure what we're trying to accomplish here. It reads like a Florida statute to me personally. And so, I guess my first question is can this be dummied up? Can it be made simpler and still achieve the same results?
Can I address
Sure.
the previous point, Clint?
Sure.
It doesn't prohibit this body from seeing it. It just says the city council has to be the deciding body. So if there is an election for them to,
I just think it's, how we did it last time, it just turned into a huge disease, because we went through 2 quasi-judicial
right.
hearings that, in retrospect, I don't think was necessary.
So it's not common for it to go before the city council. Usually it's a board of adjustment or a planning board that makes the decision on the variance, and then it can be appealed to the city council. But if we're going to have this board hear it and then it still goes to the city council, the appeal would be to circuit court. So but the governing body is currently listed as the deciding body. If it's a legislative decision here at this point, that if they want to have the P&Z be the deciding body, it's up to you as a city as to how you want that to.
Yeah, I know in Port St. Joe, we did have it that way, and we made an ordinance stating the city council had to do it, because it was too big of a decision.
Sometimes.
The city council wanted to be the ones that made
Right.
that decision.
Right. And so your question, I'm sorry?
So, as I read through this, it's not clear to me. I mean, it seems very complicated, and maybe that's needed to be very specific about it, but so maybe somebody like Clint can understand this pretty well. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I just thought it was kind of hard to understand what this is, and why are we doing this? Is this going to address situations like we just had with the Canal Street home and the variance?
Yeah, he wouldn't have had any chance in this,
Okay, so this would have,
because he did it actually beforehand.
right,
And he could have built a smaller house, or he could have fit it in the footprint.
Comment on that same point. As I read through it, it's official language, and I believe it needs to be so, to be enforceable and minimize wiggle room, as you stated. I liked it in some of the specific points. It has 4 examples, and it gives those examples to really help clarify, at least in this case. For example, a property owner cannot be issued a setback variance on a property that can reasonably contain a house with a smaller footprint. I like those examples, and maybe if there was an example for each one.
Yeah, if I might jump in real quick. If it's the consensus of the board, for example, there's still a lot of steps, so it would be a 2-reading ordinance for the council.
Yeah,
so if the board wants to maybe recommend approval with tasking staff that before it goes to council for the first reading, maybe try and simplify a little bit, streamline it a little bit.
I may be the only one who has that.
I've heard from several citizens as well, so I definitely think I've been getting that feedback.
And if I could offer too, if you want to develop an application in simpler terms that kind of reflects what the legal terminology and the technical terminology says, we certainly can do that. But I would encourage you to try to be as specific as possible in the code. So as someone who is reviewing it reviews the application, they can certainly point to a citation that says this is what we're required to look at and this is the definition of that review.
I think right now our application does have a simple explanation on it.
So, point of clarification, I agree with Tim that the language, and I was an engineer, so I'm used to technical language, and just for clarification, let's say Tim has a pool that's already in the city, and he was given a variance because he wanted to fit the pool in without being too close to the house. So instead of, 7.5 feet at the rear, or 10 feet at the rear, the city gave him a 2-foot variance, so now his pool deck is 8 feet from the property line. Does that mean a person who then applies to the city for a variance to do the same thing could use his property and say, and then it would streamline the approval?
So there is a part E, says every case is individually reviewed on its own merit. So you can't compare one to the other. You can't say, well, my neighbor got it over here, because it's based on the situational occurrence of the property. It's supposed to be a hardship of the property. It's not supposed to be because my pool is going to be 16 feet and I need a smaller setback. It's supposed to be because of the hardship of the property. So, and in your example too, that would not be an issue eligible for a variance because it's specifically talking about the primary built structure. Any accessory uses would have to follow the requirements of the codes, the setbacks. That means maybe they're putting a pool that's too big for that site on the property. They might need to
Well,
shrink it.
that's happened a lot in the city,
Right.
as we all know. So.
Lisa,
And
I
I
see you
just-
raising your hand back there, but let us get through
Okay.
these questions and we'll move to public
Okay,
comment.
thank you.
Yep.
So then the other thought or question I had about this was, and I keep going back to the last issue we had, the major issue. It looks like if this applies, that case would have had no recourse but to move that building back, tear it down. I mean, this makes it sound like unless there's if somebody did this by accident, and they're asking for a variance to the rules, not because there's a protected oak tree standing there and they want to go a little bit closer to this property line to save the tree line, or there's a wetland there and they need to, this sounds like that, this is for those types of cases.
That's right.
What about the cases where somebody just made a mistake or did it on purpose? I don't know. And we have no recourse with this except to deny it, I guess is what the way I'm
That would
interpreting this.
be the accurate way to respond to the request for the application. If there's another legal way around it, I would have to defer to Clint, but you're
I think under this, he wouldn't have been able to get it.
So, and I'm sorry I'm stealing all this time. The other thing is our process of how we got to that situation maybe should be addressed within the development order. But should we have something in here that can help us prevent what happened way before it? And the other thing I was thinking about, is there a way to maybe grant this, if you're going to grant a variance for some exceptional case, that there be some repercussions, there be some fine or penalty to it, so that you won't have to tear down a building, perhaps, but you still make them suffer for the action.
And that did come up with previous.
So your first question, so your question about whether or not they could maybe pay a fee and move forward and still so that's a question I think that maybe there could be some sort of agreement with the property owner on, that they pay a fee and they're allowed to move on. Under my kind of review of this application process, they would not be able to be granted the variance because Part F, says just because they made a mistake doesn't give them the right to receive a variance.
Right.
It's an economic issue at that point. I would be more concerned about what you were mentioning earlier, the process, and when the footprint of the building was marked out, why wasn't it caught then? Because there should have been somebody checking those setbacks when the markings were made so that they knew they were 20 feet instead of the 15.
Well, so let me dive into that process exists, and I will keep pushing that. The contractor messed that up. They skipped that step. And that is their responsibility. That is not the building department's fault or the city's fault, and he admitted that. So, under this procedure, because you consciously skipped that step, you can't get a variance now for that. The person who made the mistake needs to be accountable, and they can't just turn around and blame the building department for it. So the process exists.
So what you might consider then is at the building permit application stage, to have some very strong language in there about the variance, and that if you mess up, you're not eligible for a variance, and you need to really consider it.
And we highlight those things on the development order now.
now specifically.
And he stated that it's common practice in this area to completely ignore that development order, skip the inspection, and move forward because it's in his best interest to not slow down his crews.
Until cities stop issuing variances.
Yep.
That's how you learn the lesson.
Putting teeth on it, all of a sudden, then he's not gonna skip that step in the process.
Well, what I was thinking, and I actually talked to ECP today kind of about this, is, so this addresses one part of it. Maybe there needs to be a recommendation to look at the development order process, and as far as if they skip a step, there's a fine. Currently, you can do a stop order, but there's no, I don't think there's a penalty other than they have to stop work, and that becomes the sheriff issuing a stop work order. So maybe this works for this part of the process, and to keep this from happening, we need to address this other thing.
I think
we're
you're
talking
spot
about.
on. We were actually just talking about that, and I'll let you dive into it.
Sure, so I'm not really familiar with the building permit process, but I'm still wondering how they got to pour concrete or footers by skipping a step. It seems like you would have to check that box before you could get that permit to move forward to put those footers. So I'm not familiar with how that process works. As far as penalties go, it's not uncommon for you to have code enforcement fines. So, but you have to allow the offender, so to speak, to have an opportunity to rectify the situation before the fine starts ticking on the clock. So for example, if he skipped a step, then you would say, hypothetically, because I would think you just wouldn't get the permit to put the foundation in, but hypothetically, you would be cited by code enforcement, and code enforcement says you have 20 days to make the application right, and then within those 20 days, there's no penalty because you have to give the guy some time to respond. And then, but after that 20-day period, if he has taken no action, you can start assessing fines by the day or however you want to structure that.
And it's my understanding that the way the current system works in the city is by Florida statute, this would have to be an ordinance in order to enact the penalties, the fines. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, it would.
Okay, so it can't just be a procedure that's in place with ECP or the building department. It would have to be an add-on ordinance.
Yes.
Yeah, we probably have the planning collaborative draft it up, I would think, and then bring it back through the same process. But that's something that we can start moving on pretty quickly.
Gulf County does something like that where they fine people if they violate the code. I could look into that and see exactly how they do it. But we're in that position where you want to be able to give people an ability to do some work. Caught in that catch-22, people come in, they just do it because all they know is just going to be a fine and they can just move on. But this is pretty strict here. It's a very limited situation where you can get a variance under this.
Right, and so I guess my last comment on this for you guys is, this is very strict, and maybe that's what we should adopt, is a very strict process. I'm not sure, I kind of go back to the military. Somebody launches one nuclear weapon and you don't send 200 back to them, is processing. So is this what we want to do? If somebody made an actual mistake and it's going to cost them more than the value that the building is worth, is that the right thing to do? Maybe it is, and maybe that's where we get teeth in this, but I'm not sure. I'm just not sure if it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Certainly.
This has been discussed at the first time it came up at the House on Canal. And fine was part of that discussion because of what the builders are doing. Since I've been here, we've had 4 cases that have gone through the city with variances. And the same thing. Builders, one guy built the house backwards and he encroached I think it was 8 feet and got a variance for it. Nothing happened. And something was supposed to be put in place. And this is where the city's fallen down on this. Because I sat at the meetings and it was put in place that it was supposed to be measured, everything was supposed to be done before they do the foundation. And just like this time, it didn't happen. Now, if there's a fine out there, a hefty fine put in somewhere in an ordinance, That'll stop that, because this is a pretty small town, and I still do not understand why the building department, we ain't building 1,000 houses in Mexico Beach. The biggest thing was the development down here was the apartments. I don't understand why the building department is not going out on a regular basis, like every other day, and looking at these houses under construction. There's only a handful of them at a time. I don't understand that. And this has been going on and on and on. And the only way that's going to stop is the building department, to me, gets their act together. Because that's what's brought on all 4 cases so far.
Yeah, I'll offer a little bit. So, I mean, the building department does hundreds of inspections per month. Hundreds.
We're talking about the foundation, not.
Well, I mean, I understand,
Just the
but
foundation
all of
core.
them.
The responsibility of building the house is not on the inspector, it's on the contractor. So, yes, one way to handle that is through fines, and we can certainly, if that's the way you all want to go, that's the way we can start going, but, or you pass a very strict variance process, and once builders understand that if you build a foot over, that it's not going to be approved, they're going to start paying a lot more attention to where that line is.
What?
It's their responsibility to build the house properly.
Yeah, that's what this is right here.
Mhm.
That'll stop
And
that
I'd
right
like to
there.
add to this, when I first moved here and I started coming to the council meetings, I left and I asked somebody outside of this room, why are people so angry? And the response I got was, a lot of times things are perceived as being unfair. Some people take advantage of the ordinances, the variances, and so on. It seems to only apply to certain people. This provides fairness across the board. The problem is the perception of the community is it's been way too wishy-washy for a long time, where one person goes, purposely comes into this town, does something on purpose knowing that they're going to get a variance. They get it every time. And that makes these citizens mad because they followed the rules. And we're now putting some teeth to that, and we're saying, no, you do it, you're going to do it at your own peril.
I think, and since we were talking about Canal Parkway, the most recent, there was a lot of testimony given, but at the very end, we heard a lot of people talking about that contractor and how many homes. Then at the end, he admitted he had only built 3. That was his 3rd house in Mexico Beach. Not 30, but 3. I think the good contractors in this region, they go by the book. They go by the book because they don't want to have to come to council meetings and they don't have to apply for variances. They don't want to screw it up. But there's the random, Johnny
He owned his mistake. He owned it, and I agree that it should have teeth, and I personally voted for denial of that. But he also said he disadvantaged himself by building the home where he did. He shortened his parking, could have had more square footage had he shifted it to the proper location. So I don't know that they're coming and doing it intentionally.
He screwed up twice.
Some people have.
I don't know that, but I, for one, am a little bit surprised that there haven't been more mistakes. I know there have been 4, and I wish the number was 0. But I think it's sort of unprecedented that you're in a community that 86% of all the homes were destroyed or uninhabitable, and you have everyone that wants their home built tomorrow, and the pressure on the building department. I hope they're 100% perfect going forward. But 4 that have missed, I kudos to our building department.
Like I said, I like what's in here, but I think you need to go back to the building department, and there should be a fine, and it should be, everything's been on a variance. It's been, like I said, pouring. And as soon as that foundation is poured, the city needs to make sure that it was surveyed, and go out there and check the measurements, and if it wasn't surveyed, a fine needs to be put in place right there. Even if it's where it's supposed to be, if they weren't notified that this happened the way it should have been.
Well,
That's,
I don't quite understand, because don't you have a foundation inspection? And at that foundation inspection, wouldn't you go pull a tape and see if it met the setbacks? So and at least the pilings might have been put in, but you wouldn't have the whole house built
You
that
could move the
time.
pilings.
Yeah, it wouldn't have.
That's when that should have been caught. And that one's also particularly challenging because, you go out there today and it's kind of obvious. You go out there when that happened and the road wasn't built and it was just a house out there in the middle of nowhere. It's a lot harder to pick up on 4 feet. So I can get that,
But it wouldn't. That's when a building, I mean, if the survey wasn't done or there wasn't stakes in there where with the building inspector, go pull a tape and see if it met the setbacks.
Exactly.
Then you just put a stop work order on it until you get a proper
I think
survey.
same pulling the tape
If
from
I could-
what?
I haven't seen a house on pilings, my house on pilings, that you start putting pilings in the ground, it's weeks before the house even goes up. I mean, it's weeks just to get the pilings in, I gotta sit, this and this, and I could be right there to come out. The foundation, you can see them digging. They're already digging, they're putting the stuff in the ground, they haven't even poured it, they gotta bring in the dirt to fill. That's usually a week process, 2-week process. I don't understand why the city has not inspected these homes to make sure that where they're supposed to be. You're not that, I mean, yeah, I understand you got oil inspections, you got electrical, you got plumbing, you got everything else. But the foundation is the first thing. And we're not building 1 million houses.
And
There's no
doesn't-
reason why that should not be done.
Let me ask you a question, Michael. Isn't EPIC, they're paid, they take a percentage of the building permits and everything like that. So if we're really busy here, they'd be bringing in more money, which means they could hire a couple more inspectors to make sure all these things get done.
And we're not talking about a foundation inspection. It's
Measurement.
10
Measurement.
minutes.
Yeah,
10 minutes to measure. Is it
Well,
where?
also, just to remind everybody, we're talking, in this particular scenario, we're talking about everybody focusing on that builder, but nobody is focusing on all of the neighbors that will permanently be negatively impacted by his mistake. And that's the real people we ought to be focusing on. I don't care anything about a builder from Alabama. The people that I'll be focused on are the citizens that are negatively impacted on that street, and they will be for the rest of the time here.
If you're gonna build a $4.2 million house, you gotta make sure all eyes are dotted, it's growth.
Yeah, so I
You
would
would
say,
think.
if it's the consensus of the board, and I think it already has been well established, we come back with a different ordinance in terms of collecting the fines through code enforcement. That's the way to do that.
Yeah, I think there's some things that still need to be looked into.
Yeah, but in
Like
terms
the
of
fine aspect
but I
of
don't
it.
think that goes into the variance process.
The fines should go into the building process.
Question for the planning collaborative. Is this language similar to other clients that you've had, or?
Yes, the standards of review you see here in Part D are pretty common throughout local governments across the state of Florida. I can't testify to
Right.
Georgia, Alabama, or anywhere
Right.
else, but these are pretty common.
Okay. So it's safe to assume, which it's never safe to assume, that our neighboring municipalities, whether it be counties or cities, have something very similar
I
to
got Port
this.
St. Joe's right here.
Yes, however, I will disclaim that some local governments will allow variances outside of the building envelope, which is what we have here, the area. Some will allow parking variances and other things, but in my viewpoint, the reason why you need a variance is because there's a hardship on the land, and it even says that in case law. There's got to be a hardship on the land, whether or not you have a 50-foot wetland setback on a 100-foot deep lot, or something to that effect where it makes the lot unbuildable the way it is. If you can't avoid a heritage tree or something, it's usually the reason for the variance is because there's a hardship that is attached to that piece of property, and that's why you're supposed to look at them individually as a case
I'll
separate.
tell you how, in Port St. Joe, we have what's known as like a special exception. It's not a variance. And it-
True,
and it-
there are
it-
special exceptions and conditional uses are
And
other
it-
tools.
And this is the primary thing. Someone wants to put a pole barn in, but in order to fit it in there, they gotta encroach 2 feet on the 5-foot setback. And how we handle it over there is, if no neighbor complains, they usually pass it. One person says they don't like it,
Well,
it
it's
gets
not
thrown out.
defensible,
That's how it's been done for
it's
years.
okay, yeah. So a special exception can be a certain condition of the use or use might be generally allowable in a zoning district. There's a special condition of a use, might be hours of operation, maybe a bar that you want to put a special consideration on. And so it's not usually like a variance, but those are other tools that you can use to approve things within next page.
I've got another question for you on the purpose. It says a variance cannot be issued for any comprehensive plan goal.
That's
We've
correct.
been discussed over and over and over with wetlands. how would that affect somebody on property that has some wetlands and they want to, whatever, put another building in the backyard, a pole barn or this or that, and something's there, and, you know, setback variance might have to be moved 5 feet or something. And this absolutely says right in here that, no. So I mean,
Right, so you
This
do
is-
have a policy in your comprehensive plan that says you have a 30-foot wetland setback. You also have a policy in the comprehensive plan that says you have a 20-foot setback from the canal. And that's primarily for water quality protection. You know, you want that to filter through before it, whatever, fertilizer or whatever you're using on the upland part, to filter through before it hits the water, that runoff. So those things would not be allowed to receive a variance for, those setbacks.
how would that affect, well, not a variance, but I guess that has nothing to do with a builder coming in and buying land with wetlands. And case in point, I'm kind of curious about, because I know this is going to come back to us eventually. One developer, I think it was 30-something homes building, it was down by Wallace Pumps, where all the dirt was brought in. And that came to a halt. Nothing happened. He was building like 36 homes and that stopped. And I think Doug told me it wasn't feasible. The money was too much to do what he wanted to do. But all that dirt that got brought in, my understanding is it covered up some of the wetlands.
Yeah, I've heard.
And now he's looking at building more homes because now it's feasible after he covered up the wetland, knowing the wetland was there.
Well, if you have a DEP permit to fill the wetland, and you fill the wetland, there's no more wetland, so there's no more setback.
Well, if you didn't have a DEP permit, you filled them.
I was talking to the engineer for the project last week, and they said that no wetlands have been touched on that one, and they will be coming back to the city between P&Z and the council soon. I mean, the next couple of months.
They actually had another wetland survey done, and they had more buildable.
Yeah, that's what I was
Oh, really?
told, is they
Yep.
actually had additional buildable area.
Okay,
So,
so that changed. Okay, so I was just curious how that would be if you filled them in. Okay.
but yeah, you can't just destroy the wetland and then say there's no wetland.
Are there any more questions of the board for planning collaborative? Otherwise, we're going to open it up for public comment.
Thank you.
All right, let's move to public comment. Would anyone from the public like to come up and state your name, where you live?
You mean you don't know yet? All right, Lisa Logan, 402 Maryland. You made me sit there so long, I forgot half my questions.
Well, hopefully half of them were answered. My strategy.
I have several questions, concerns, issues here. The first one is, I absolutely agree with Tim. Going back to this language here, it is much more technical than it needs to be, especially about the 6 variance requirements there. We need to keep this language as simple as possible. The more technical it becomes, the more gray areas there are when we all go to discuss it. And that concerns me greatly because I've watched 20 years worth of these variances, and it's pretty straightforward, those 6 items, what constitutes a variance request. And that in and of itself is not usually the issue. The issue is doing favors for people, saying, oh, it's too expensive to make him have to tear it down, blah, blah, blah. But the language itself, from a writer's standpoint, needs to be dumbed down. If you want to put it that way, it needs to be simplified. And while I understand that there are some technical things that have to be in there, let's make it a whole lot simpler. You have got to put in there the fines that are going to be marked against the contractor or against EPCI, whoever is going to be fined. If you don't spell out the fines in black and white, those fines are not going to be applied. Whether it should say you have, if you violate this and you build and you come and ask for permission, for forgiveness and permission after the fact, you have to tear it down or you're fined a whopping amount of money. That's really it. But that's got to be in there. We have a culture here in Mexico Beach that started before the hurricane but has exploded since the hurricane, and you all know it. Contractors have come in here and they see that they can get away with it and ask for forgiveness after they've done it. And they have been forgiven every time. You've got to stop that. So if they see in black and white that there is a consequence, maybe they won't try it. The other issue is the council has got to enforce it. So if this can stop the council from playing favorites, which has been a huge issue over the years, then I'm all for it. But it does not have to be complicated language to state that. And I understand your standpoint from putting in circuit court. I understand that, but Lord have mercy, what a can of worms that is going to open up. I don't see the need to take anything to circuit court. I really don't. We have 32 years of precedent using this. That should be enough. So I'm concerned. I'm all for anything we can do to stop people from doing what has happened on Canal Parkway and over in Ocean Plantation and all the other places that Rock was mentioning and all of y'all have mentioned. I'm all for that. I've been for that. But you've got to write this down in black and white. You've got to make it very clear, and you've got to consider how you're going to stop a council that changes every year from playing favorites. I know lots of people in this town who have had to rip out porches, HVAC systems, foundations, and to allow somebody to say, oops, I made a measuring mistake. Come on. By the way, that house on Canal Parkway, I'd like to know how they got the permit for that swimming pool, because that's an accessory structure and cannot be built until the primary structure has its development order or its CO. So that's just another issue. But you need to put some teeth in this. But don't leave us open to other interpretations. You know how we can argue things. You know how we all have different interpretations. You've got to make it crystal clear. Because while part of this deals with theory, we have to deal with the reality here in Mexico Beach. And I'm just concerned that some of this does not. And I do not understand why the building department, I'm with Rock 100%. That building department should be out there looking at that. We have foundation inspections. They should be out there looking at that. There should be nothing allowed until every single permit is in place. I don't care how much it sets back a framing crew. That's just part of doing business. And most of the places that I have lived, you have an option. Your option is you tear it down or you don't get your CO. Most places are much more hardcore than we are. And I don't see why we can't be a little more hard-nosed than we have. So please consider those things while you're looking at this.
Thank you.
Just one thing before I forget. There's nothing in here that we could put in that would stop someone from taking something to the circuit court if they thought we did something wrong. That appeal is always there.
See, it's never been brought up, and now all of a sudden, here it is.
Is it acceptable for me to speak?
Well, let's see, is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? All right, well then we'll conclude that part of the meeting and open it to the board.
I was just going to suggest this. I can't even remember what it was regarding, but when dealing with highly technical language and contracts, I have seen where people put in summation points where they basically write at a high school level for the summation, so that basically your attorney can go through and read all of the finer points. But yet, there's a summation period at the bottom, which is pretty elemental, which anybody can pick up and understand. So it gives it gives the exact points you need for legality, and it also gives a clear understanding and summation.
That-
Couldn't that be possible here?
That's why I like what she said before, is that your application is where you could dumb that down.
Okay, so.
And then they can go, okay, but we need to go to the code and like look at it specifically.
So do we need to make a motion or a recommendation to the council to come up with a new,
So we are working on your applications also. We just haven't worked on this one because we don't know what the code is gonna say yet.
gotcha,
So
okay.
definitely.
So that's already in the works? We
It
don't
will
need to
be
worry
once
about it.
we have the language to go by. I like that idea, and I think that appropriate place would be in the application and like the process of the application that goes before that. So we can certainly look at doing that.
So I'm the one who brought this up, I know about dumbing it down, but I also understand the need for very legal language to be specific when you're dealing with issues like this. So I was really just trying to understand what was necessary here, and so I would agree that probably this is okay, and going with the language in the development order and the development request would be the proper way to go. It's just like the charter should be kind of, I won't go to that point. but I think the language in this is it's legal language, and it may be hard for people like me to understand, but it may be necessary to enforce what we want to take place with the variance, and so I'm thinking it's probably okay. Is what I'm trying to say.
We gotta look at the application, and that should have a nice summation that everybody can read and understand. We need to follow through on that and not forget about it.
Well, that's where it has to go back to the council to come up with fines in here for the building. Now, how,
I don't think that would go in here.
no, not in here.
That'd be
but
a separate
for the building order to happen right away. But how, you have the language right here, which I like. I mean, this will stop anything right here from happening. But, so you stop it right here at this table. Yep, you get your variance, sorry, that ain't happening. How do you stop the council from turning around and just taking this piece of paper and throwing it in the garbage and saying, well, we'll give them the variance anyway?
You don't,
By
that's
vote-
why they're
by
like,
voting them out the next time.
But I mean, you.
Or the person who's on the wrong end of that, so.
See, that's the point that Lisa made, that this just keeps coming back all the time, and even when the planning and zoning board has voted 5-0 that no, it goes and it changes.
Well,
So can I just make a comment on that point? When the city council is considering a quasi-judicial issue like this, they are supposed to have findings of fact. And so if they are going to deny or approve a variance, they should cite findings of fact in their motion. And that should help abate some of your concern that you were just mentioning.
Okay, so this language in here is pretty much going to make them stick to doing what's
Yeah, so
right.
they're gonna have to point to one of these 6 points when they deny a variance that it doesn't meet one of these criteria.
Okay.
And there again is theory slamming up against reality, y'all.
I don't know, how do you, we don't know who's gonna be on this board
It's a good
10 years
point.
from now.
Oh, well, we sure don't know who's gonna be on council. So, but
I mean, not on this board.
legally, what we're saying is there would have been, which we denied Canal Parkway and then council approved it, but there would have been really no way for the city council to approve the variance for Canal Parkway if this had been in place.
No, I don't see.
And that's what one of the
That's sued, right? That's big.
presenters said, if they went down those
If they
5,
deny it,
6
it's
items.
based on this criteria that he didn't meet, we'd have a good case. Someone can always sue us.
Yeah.
It's whether we have a good case or not when we get sued.
And I think a good explanation of that would be if Canal Parkway had happened and we would have had this in the code already, there would have been a staff report and planning would have evaluated this request based on these standards of review. And you would have had that interpretation in front of you to make your decision. And then you would hear what the applicant has to say and consider that and then make your decision with the statement of fact.
That's real trouble.
But when that happened, you're saying that the standards of review those 6 in the simplified language are basically the same as the 6 in the new language. So it was already there, and they should have denied it based on what was already in existence, and they didn't.
I think that's really a matter for the city council, right? We're trying to determine how they behave and they act. We're an advisory committee. We how we voted on that and moved on to the city council, so.
But as I recall,
This was not in the-
did you not have any real guidance to go by for a recommendation with the last case?
Because it
This is
wasn't
what
in.
that is
Although
to
it's
resolve.
stated in the application, those standards of review, it was not adopted in our land development
Right.
code. So I couldn't reference it with firm feet.
There we go. Okay.
I couldn't base my
And
recommendation
that's
on
what, that's
that.
what this helps to address.
Right.
This solves that.
And so what are you looking for, Mr. City
I
Manager?
would-
interim?
Hopefully a favorable recommending to the council.
And then what about the part with the penalty? Is
Yeah,
that part
I
and
think-
parcel to this? or-
I think there's pretty clear consensus that y'all want a secondary ordinance for the penalties that will be enforced through code enforcement. So I think we heard that loud and clear and can go to the drawing board for
So
that.
just to clarify, you wouldn't put something like penalties in a land development, that's addressed by an ordinance, correct?
Would
Yeah.
still be an ordinance into the land development. No. No. Just an ordinance.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, that's what, okay.
Okay, so are you looking for a motion?
Yes.
Would anyone like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to accept section 7.04.02 to accept the variances with a recommendation to the city council to add fines in the building department for inspection of the house foundations.
And to have a clear DO application to be drafted afterwards.
Is that too specific, or do we need to ask for a review of
That's what you
fines
want
in
to do.
general?
Why don't you just give me the direction to look into it and write up a draft ordinance?
Okay?
Okay, do you want to reword your?
I'll rewrite the motion to approve section 7.04.02 variances and recommend the city attorney draw up an ordinance for fines added to the process and building department for foundation inspections.
I would leave the foundation inspection off of it, just building department.
Building department fines.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Call for a vote?
Okay. Mr. Durkins?
Yes.
Mr. Elzey?
Yes.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Kreis?
Yes.
Mr. Limperman?
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay. With that resolved, is there anything else?
Nothing for me.
All right. I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.